everybody, and welcome back to another Chitalayam video. Today, we're going to be talking about school abuse, and we would like to make a few disclaimers about this topic that we're going to be talking about. Akshay, would you like to go first?
Okay, so the first disclaimer is that education is important and schools are important. So anything that we say are just our experiences, and then few things that we think there needs to be some changes to. And we are not going against schools in general or education in general. They are very important, but of course, with any systems, we can always find ways to improve and changes to make, because change is the only thing that's constant, and we're gonna try to find what changes we think should be made here.
And another disclaimer, our conversation today is meant to raise awareness, and we are going to be sharing our opinions and knowledge that we have on the topic. And it may not be completely inclusive of everyone's experiences or knowledge about the topic. And so please learn with us today on more about this topic. So I'd like to ask a question to get to know everybody on the call before we get started. So the question today is, what is a fun memory or good memory that you've had in your schooling years? It could be any year that you were in school that you remember you had a good memory. I can go first. A fun memory that popped to my head when thinking about this question is my middle school. We had house competitions. All school students were split into four different houses. I was part of the samurai's house, and we had a competition for Pongal, which is a Tamil festival of harvest, and we had a basically a board decoration competition, and we made a golem out of all kinds of grains and agricultural produce. We used different colored beans and dals and all kinds of just food, rice and colored rice to make a golem of a pongal pot and sugarcane, but out of actual food. And so we won that board decoration competition. So that was a really fun time. We got to skip class to put in the effort to try and organize this, work with the teachers. It was a fun time.
I can totally see why that's fun. Skipping classes, yes. Um, my favorite thing is sort of like the after school stuff, where once the school's over, not everybody leaves right away. So it's like those chats that you have like in school, like after once the classes are done, or I actually walk home with my friends, and like one of those friends is actually in the call. So the chats that we have and all those things. That's like one of my memorable things I remember from school.
Yeah, I can totally, agree with that. Walking home and talking is really, really fun. It, it gave a sense of, what do I say, a sense of calm while getting home after a hectic day in school. I'd say that was also one of my great experiences in school. And another one I would say is all the were the inside jokes that we had in high school. We had a lot. I'm pretty sure even Akshay remembers some. So those were very, very, pretty fun moments.
Totally hear you. Yeah, one of the best parts of school is like you spend so much time with these people. So diving into our topic for today, school abuse. So when you hear those words, what do you think we're talking about?
I can answer this first. For me, of course, there's a lot of things involved in this. But the first thing I can think of is emotional abuse, because at least from my experiences in India, people don't really understand mental health enough, and the awareness is not there yet, and that's kind of the reason why we're doing Chitarim as well, right? So, and that has effects in our schooling, and because of that, I know a lot of people who have had repressed childhood trauma, and you know and there's a lot of things that some teachers do. They don't. It's not that they're a bad person. They just don't know that what they're doing is a bad thing. And while there are also some direct things like say sexual harassment or physical abuse that are bad too, and like bullying and things, the first thing that came to the thing that came to my mind when I heard the word school abuse, it was more of like the emotional abuse, because that's something I think everybody has gone through, once in their life. They're like, yeah, I hate this teacher, I don't like this teacher, or I don't like the subject anymore because of this, because of that. And as kids, as students, we also hit puberty around the same time as well. So there was a lot of things that was important for us, and so there was like an empathy gap with the teachers as well. And there have been times where I've seen that India has placed the system is in a way where it suits the people who are doing well. So the ones who are not doing well sometimes kind of like gets hit. Yeah, so I've seen that happen, and of course, yeah, I'm talking from my experience. I'm not generalizing it. So that was the first thing that came to my mind. What about you guys?
Um, uh, One of the things that that I get after hearing the word school abuse is the actual physical abuse that a lot of students go through, especially in a lot of rural areas in India, where disciplining the child using a stick and hitting them is still very prevalent, I would say. So that is one of the most alarming things that I can think of when talking about school abuse.
Yeah, when I think about school abuse, I'm thinking about any forms of abuse that occur in a school-related context, right? Teachers to students, students to other students. And it doesn't have to be within school hours, it can be outside of school hours as well. But the context in which it happens is kind of school-related or education-related, like after-school programming or tutoring offered by a teacher, in those kind of contexts. And the word abuse is like it's a blanket term for a lot of different things. Akshay mentioned a few, like bullying, emotional abuse. There's like physical abuse. There's sexual abuse, harassment, bullying. All of these lead to a lot of different um, traumatic and really bad and sad experiences for the victim in the situation. And it's not talked about enough because it does happen and it gets covered up too much by different schools. So, what are some of the ways that you think, um, which forms of, which forms of abuse do you think are more prevalent in the education context, that you can imagine that you've seen?
I'll go for this first. I'd say it's pretty varied according, for each school or even each class, I'd say. It's pretty varied, but one very common thing that we see in rural areas, as I said, is physical abuse. While in the cities, it's more, going towards the mental and I would say even sexual abuse, because we've seen a lot of cases recently also regarding that. But I think physical abuse is not that relevant in urban cities where the teacher is really reprimanded if they actually what do I say, actually beat the student in pretext of school.
My answer for this is emotional abuse again, because I do understand physical abuse and sexual abuse. All those things do happen, and I'm very sorry that it happens as well. But emotional abuse is the one thing that that's like sort of like pervasive, in the sense that it happens like all over in both like rural areas as well as like urban areas. Because a physical abuse would not just affect your body, it would also sort of affect you in the sense that if they're beating you, that means that you're a bad student, or you did something bad, or it's not really for like any sane reasons. It's actually just like the teacher doing something. And of course, it can also be in the sense that students sort of being very unruly, that they could bully a teacher, and we're not taking that. We're not saying teachers always bully the students. So it can also be student to student thing, where can be the smallest of thing, where say a teacher could give special privileges to her or his or her favorite students. But then by doing that, and that's a you some would even argue that's just human nature. But the thing is, by doing that, you could be sending the message to somebody else, saying that they weren't good enough to be to make the cut. And you know that's a sort of thing where you have to actively sort of work towards not showing too much bias, and that's something you have to work with every single batch. And sometimes I have not seen that. And the one thing I am not a huge fan of, it didn't really happen in my school, it happened in college, but I've heard stories that happen in schools as well, which is the teacher is like very proud that not a lot of people are going to pass a class, and like that's their job. So like we like your job is to like teach us enough that we pass the class. And they look at it more in the sense that, hey, and I am doing it in a sarcastic tone, and I'm not really going against any teacher, but the way I hear it, it's like, hey, I'm bad at my job, so you have to put more work into it. And that's not the right message they should be sending. They can say, hey, the subject is hard, but we can both work on it, hopefully, and hopefully we do it well. And that can be some tough love, and say, hey, you would need to work hard on this. Like you can't like not do work and still be able to do anything, and still be able to get good grades. You have to work on it. And that is not wrong message at all, but some people, the way they say it is, hey, you're not going to pass the class. And that is why I would say the emotional abuse that comes with emotional abuse itself, as well as other abuses like bullying, or physical abuse, or sexual abuse.
Means, I would say that like one of the reasons abuse isn't seen as abuse is because you don't think it is. Like physical abuse is not really seen as abuse in at least Indian context that I've seen so far. It's like hitting kids is seen as an acceptable form of punishment, just raising them to be good people. But that's not the case. That's physical abuse. And emotional abuse is like not meeting their emotional needs, or emotionally blackmailing kids to do different things. Uh, in a teacher context, it could be like regarding assignments or things like that. Um, I know, like thinking back to elementary school, I know that physical abuse was prevalent because I know that when I was failing to read something correctly in class, like the teacher hit me, like she slapped me across the face, right? That sucked, and it had to happen at least like one or two times, and she happened to do it when a like the one of the higher officials of the school was walking by that class, and she did it to a student, and that's when she got fired because someone else saw it happening. A higher official saw it. He was like maybe second to the president, or basically some level like that, or principal of the school. So I know that physical abuse is pretty common in school contexts. And note that I said she because in a lot of cases you might think it's a guy who's doing it, but it while there may be a male majority in some of these situations, it's equally probable, or like it's likely that women can do it too. So this was an older woman, and she was doing this to students. So at least in my experience, physical abuse has been common because people don't see it as a problem. They think it's an acceptable way to go about education when it's not.
I'm actually very glad you brought that point, because these abuses, can be done by both men, women. Like the gender doesn't really matter, and it's also the same with who is on the other end as well. You can be a guy or a girl and still be abused. Uh, and of course, I'm not saying it's a probability is the same, because that you can probably like find a statistic for the city, for the school. So I can't really generalize that. uh even if I can, I don't really know what to generalize it to. But the important thing is both like men and women, boys and girls can be abused. And sometimes when we take it to just like numbers and statistics, we can say, hey, like this is happening more, whereas like to the person it affected them. It doesn't matter what the statistical probability is, or like how likely that would happen, what are the odds, because it happened to them and it's personal after that. And the moment it happened, it's gonna affect them potentially for the rest of their life, depending on like what it was. Or they might have to like work on it like for a long time. Their personalities could have changed. their interest in something could have changed. They could have changed as a person because of that. They could have got more defensive. They could have uh, got like sort of gone into their shell a bit more because they know that the place outside the shell isn't pretty great. And then, of course, like the changes that you have, maybe not everyone can like relate to it, or even if they can, like, would you be willing to share it? Would you be vulnerable? And we can all say vulnerability is a good thing and everything, but when you were a student, when you were a kid, like, would you won't be thinking along all those lines. And at these things are happening during those times where we can say, when we say, hey, like, I was a child when I did that. Yeah, but it also happened when I was a child. And that is the part that we I mean, maybe not we, but like, I want to press more, because some things that happen are not acceptable, but like, for it to not be acceptable, we have to talk about it, and hopefully some reforms do come.
Yep, I can totally agree on that. And to add some context in terms of talking, I'd say the part which requires the most attention is, encouraging people to speak up, or encouraging people to talk to others, or talk to somebody, to vent out their thoughts. Because one thing I've noticed in general is a lot of people, generally they say, "Oh yeah, I'm always there for you. You can open up to me anytime you want." But what people don't understand, no, this general statement actually makes no difference for the other person, because the natural reaction when you're going through something like this is to just keep it to yourself and move on, right? So that natural reaction that people, what do I say? People just keep it to themselves. That natural reaction has to be changed. And if you're going to change the natural reaction, I'd say there should be a very drastic change in the way things are looked at, right? For the natural reaction to change. So that's one thing I like to say, because just going and telling, like organizing, say, what if some teacher goes to a class and say, hey, whatever happens to you, you can always come to me. Do you think the student is actually going to go and talk to the teacher? Probably not.
Yeah, you bring up a really good
Because
point.
yeah,
I feel like it's the same thing for a lot of other mental health related issues. A person, let's say a person commits suicide, right? And then everyone who's associated with that person, who knew them in life, were friends, family, whatever, they might saying, "Oh, this is so sad. You can talk to me if anything happens." But for most cases, the people who are going through problems are not going to be the ones who are easily going to speak up about it. It's more that the people around them have to notice and ask them, like, specifically, "Are you okay?" Like, ask them more direct questions, or talk to them more, or be a good friend, right? You can only be that kind of supporter for your friends. You can't necessarily post that on a Facebook page where you have friends from all different parts of your life who you're not even close to all of them right now, right? And you both brought up something that I kind of wanted to ask as a question. Actually, you mentioned how it it affects a kid that it has happened to. Let's say the victim is a kid in a school context, but what if the perpetrator was also a kid, right? In the case of bullying or emotional abuse, physical abuse, it could be kids doing it to other kids, other classmates within the school. And how does one come forward and talk about those things, or be vulnerable to someone else, like Dakshinamoorthy suggested, right? So how does the kid who was possibly a perpetrator in the past seek forgiveness or talk about it? Do they talk to the person they've done it to? Like, what should those kids do? Because if they didn't really know what they were doing was considered abuse in the moment, or they'd grown up from being a bully to realizing what they were doing was wrong, what do those kids do?
My first thoughts is, like, sort of having a school counselor, but then again, the same thing that Dakshinamurthy said could happen, where like, you can say, hey, you can go to the school counselor, and like, they will do something about it. But like, let's say you do go to school counselor, and image is a very big thing when you're a student, when you're a kid. So the moment you go to a counselor, people are going to think, hey, like, there's something wrong with them. that even happens now with therapies and stuff. So of course it could very easily happen when it's a student, right? So I would say one thing is necessitating everyone to go to a school counselor and having enough school counselors in the school to be able to do that. uh, and that's one thing I would say. And then also, anytime a kid has, say, like body dysmorphia or anxiety or those things, and then you are a teacher teaching that student, then you have to sort of like go through a module to like learn the whole thing, have a certificate saying, hey, I can teach a student who is with this or something like that, which proves, because the parents who come there and who know this, they actually learn about all these things because it's their child. But with the teacher, how would I know that you know these things? And you know and even with this, some would even argue, what if I don't tell you that I have body dysmorphia? Why couldn't you just learn it on your own? And so there are so many steps to take, where any steps that I give are either like too far-fetched, or not enough. So I do understand it has to go from step one, step two, step three, step four. So the only thing I can ask now is, first of all, necessitating school counselors, like necessitating the meeting with school counselors, where whether you have a problem or not, you go and meet the school counselor, so that people with the problem can do it without having any shame. Because if they have to talk at some point at all times, then you have to do it. So you can say, sort of like a one-on-one meeting, right? How we do it with our supervisors when we go to work. We can sort of do the same thing, where like half an hour they have to do it, and it can be at different times of the school, where depending on the school structure, you can sort of, you would need to change few things for that to work. But it would definitely be very, very helpful if you are able to do that, because the moment you make that as like one thing, then it would have a huge effect. So that's something I would even say, they have to do it weekly or a monthly thing, uh, you know, or at least, at the very least, like get a school counselor for the school, and then we can talk about these changes. And then the next thing is, like with the teachers, they need to have educations as to the things that we are talking. They probably should do a module as to like, what would you do in the situation? Is it right? Is it wrong? Why is it right? Why is it wrong? And they have to like, be able to say all those things. And of course, I don't expect all these things to happen in rural areas right away. But if it hasn't even happened in urban areas where money is there, I mean, relatively, then how can we expect these things to happen in rural areas? Because uh, we haven't even pushed it enough to happen in the urban areas. So those are my thoughts. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think you make very good points with, especially the point about having a counselors, and not just a counselor, but having multiple people, so that everybody has enough time and enough people to talk to. And coming to student, I mean, abusing a student, I mean, a student abusing another student, I think that is one thing I would say the Indian system is getting right, at least to an extent. Because from my experience in schools, I've always felt that if I had a problem with another student, like a serious problem, and I took it to a teacher, I'm always, for all the instances I've seen, the teacher has always given a positive reaction to the person who's coming to him or her, and then actually taking actions or steps to talk to the other child, or correct the other child, or even call the parents if necessary. So that is one thing I say the system is doing right, because there is what do I say, a negative stigma which is attached to one student abusing another student in any way, emotionally, physically, or any way. And I think it's a good thing, a negative stigma has to be attached to it because it's wrong. And I think that is something that the India, I'm not sure about an American context here, but I definitely say the Indian context is getting that one right to an extent.
I can go one more thing. So I actually agree with what Dakshinamoorthy said as well. And the one thing I've also seen is that some teachers, they don't say, "Hey, you have to respect me. I'm a teacher," whereas they sort of like make it a leveling field and say, "Hey, like I'm one of you guys, I'm teaching you guys, but other than that, we're both humans, we're both Indians. And they sort of create a vibe that, even after class, sometimes you talk about just like fun stuff. So to that teacher, I wouldn't mind going and talking about my problems, because I know they're probably not going to just minimize it by saying, yeah, it happens. And having that trust is something that every teacher, they need to build it. And I have seen teachers, some teachers build, and enough so that if somebody complains about that teacher, I would actually see, hey, wait, why are you complaining about this teacher? Because I know I've had good experiences with it. So like, are you sure? And I would actually sort of question it. And wanting to question even when we hear bad things about a person, that means they've earned their trust, and that's the way I see it.
Yeah, it's I guess really important for there to be ways for students to talk about abuse that might be happening to them, or ways, or if they're seeing it happening to someone else. And it's really nice that if teachers are able to create connections with their students in such a way that students are able to go talk to the teacher about issues that they're having with other students. That's wonderful. And yeah, just reiterating the point that Dakshinamoorthy made about having multiple counselors, right? Because if it's a mandatory thing to meet a lot of counselors, then, or not a lot of, if it's mandatory to meet a counselor and there's multiple counselors, they'll have enough time and energy to meet with students. And I think part of it is definitely training. I don't know what kind of training there is right now about recognizing sexual abuse in children, or neglect or emotional abuse, what it is, what it looks like. Because if you're right that there is like some amount of negative stigma associated with it, but the problem with having negative stigma is that the people who are either victims or perpetrators of any kind of abuse don't want to expose that they're doing it or they're on the receiving end of it, because it's shameful in a way to have undergone it. Because even things like rape, when it happens in India right now, what's the family's reaction? Hide it. um, Whoever was a victim, like they're impure now, their life's ruined, and they try to keep it within the family instead of being able to seek solutions. And why is it hard to talk out about it? Because I don't think there's necessarily ways to report it or get proper justice, right? Because if, what if you could tell a teacher, but you have, or you could tell the school counselor too, but you have no way of knowing that they're going to act on it, that they're going to talk to the people involved, whether it's a teacher or a student, to solve the problem in a permanent manner. If there's no evidence or track record of teachers fixing issues, then it becomes a problem. Like with the example that I mentioned, the fact that someone in power was able to see the teacher hitting someone else is what got her to leave, right? And that's proof to all other teachers that you can't hit your kids, you can't hit your students, right? Because now they know and they've seen an example of how abuse is not tolerated in the school. So if, unless there's ways to show people that there's like solutions. I was trying to look it up. What are some of the like Indian Education Board standards on child abuse and neglect? And I really couldn't find anything. Maybe I'm not searching the right things, but I'm not seeing any quick results on Google. So teachers need to be trained on topics in a public setting in a way so they know, like, hey, you're learning this, I'm learning this, you can't be doing that, I can't be doing this. Things like that. And if there's a way to kind of show students in a way as well, teach them, hey, this is what abuse can look like. Because most kids, when it happens to them, whether it's, I think most notably with sexual or physical abuse, because those are like contact abuses, sometimes they will feel that it's wrong, and it makes kids feel really bad about themselves. In a way, they know that it's something wrong has happened, but they don't really know how or what to do about it other than keep quiet about it, and it changes their personality. But if in a school setting they're taught about, here's what it looks like, maybe students will be able to identify, okay, that is what has happened to me, it is not okay, like my feelings are validated, and then they'll be more able to talk to someone about it, because the school has shown, hey, we know that these things can happen, and if they have happened, tell us, like we can help. So I think education, like showing what these abuses actually look like in action, can be helpful as well.
I definitely agree. And actually, I remember, in one of my English exams, I don't remember which one, I had to write about peer pressure, and we had to write sort of like 1,000 words or something like that. And it was like the literature exam. And so when I did that, I actually didn't even know what peer pressure meant. And then I asked the teacher as to like, I don't know this word. I can't write 1,000 words about it because I don't even know what this is. And then the teacher was the invigilator. She explained me in like the one sentence, and then I had to write about it. But that's one thing I think that's one way we can definitely do. Of course, I don't want everyone to do it all the time because English is writing these English pieces. It also helps people write about like happy things, things that they want to talk about. So I don't want it to just be okay. This is my time. I'm going to talk about it. I want to put you to the test and like make you write about like strenuous topics. I'm not saying that, but this is one of the areas which can be used for say I'm bringing body dysmorphia again because that's something that's not talked about that should be talked about because what is body dysmorphia? Body dysmorphia is feeling bad about your body image, and that's something that technically every person who goes through puberty should know. It's something like sex education. That's something that everybody should know, everybody should learn. And somehow I only learned it in college, and I also know a lot of people who still don't know what that means because it's not even relevant enough. And of course, like everybody can get anxious, and then there's people with anxiety. So similarly, everybody can feel bad about their body, and then there are people with body dysmorphia. But what I'm trying to say is, like how is it that nobody knows what this is, and why is it not relevant? And I can actually tell you, I actually learned it only last year, it's not like I learned it in college where they taught me this. I learned it on my own as well through the internet, and I don't know why these things, which I think are relevant, haven't gone in there. Because there has to be some person who has to is because let's say the teachers do go through these trainings, right? And which they probably do. And I'm not bashing any teachers here. And if possible, I probably would want a teacher in this discussion so they can give their own side, so we would get to know them a bit more. But are their trainings updated? Like to the systems, as in to the system, as in like the lives that we live in, and are they getting updated? How updated are they? And there are even people who say, "Hey, I've taught this class for 20 years." So how has it changed from like teaching then to teaching now? And what are some things that you can do? What are some things you can't do? And what have you learned in this thing? Because of course, as a teacher, the most important thing, do you know the material? Because if you don't know the material, then you can be a great person, you can be a sage, but still, of course, I don't know if everybody likes a sage, but get with me for this point. So let's say even if they're a sage, then I still don't know if that's good enough because you know they still need to know everything, and usually sages do, but let's say they don't here. Uh, but so the teachers, they need to know the material first. If they're going to teach something, they need to know first of all, they need to know what the material is. They also need to know how to talk about it. Those are two prerequisite things. And then there are a bunch of things which are considered as bonus, which is hopefully they're a good person. Hopefully, they know these things. But I think there should be a push for a lot more things to be a part of their prerequisites. So even when you interview a teacher, because one great thing I've always seen is that every teacher, new teacher, usually they have to do like a temp class where a temporary class where they have to teach a subject like that one day, and then they will be teaching us something that's actually in the syllabus, and then see how well they do it, and then the HODs, the head of the departments, and like other teachers would come and give the person feedback, and they get to see how the students are reacting, and that is a wonderful way that they are doing it, and I truly respect that, and I want that part to continue. But I think there are a few more things that can be added, and that is more of what I'm saying. I'm not saying I don't like the system, change everything. I'm not saying that.
Hey, just to break the tension, I think sages are pretty cool. I like sages. Yeah, so building on your point, I think the biggest issue or biggest challenge behind, preventing school abuse or making people come out with school abuse is related to the big gray area between the student and the teacher. Let's say, for example, you have an incident between a student and a teacher, and a teacher has behaved inappropriately with the student. So the biggest gray area will, probably be on the student to actually have some kind of proof, right? But in reality, it might not exist. So the student might not be able to come out and talk about the teacher. And in some cases, let's say for example, a student is very angry with the teacher for something else, and he or she falsely accuses the teacher of some form of abuse anyway. And so let's say the teacher is actually punished for it. That should not happen, right? So I think that is the biggest problem in this whole scenario, is the biggest gray area. How do you? I think the institutions and all the key stakeholders in all the schools, they should actually sit around and think about this, because nothing, people think that life is black and white, but in reality, it's just not. It's always gray. So they should have a proper system in place where students are encouraged to come out for any problem, be it very minimal or be it very serious. But there should be a, what do I say, loophole or a trigger in the system which should be able to identify whether this is actually true or not. Because these kinds of things, they are life changing, right? Even for the student. A student who's affected is affected for life. And a teacher who gets punished is punished for life. He or she won't be allowed to teach anywhere in the world after having something like this on their resume. I would say that is something that which is very hard. And I do understand that. I'm not saying it's very easy, you can just do it, but I mean, in real life things are hard, but we have to make them work, right?
I totally agree with you. I was reading a bunch of like news stories, and that's one of the biggest things, right? How do you distinguish a rumor about a teacher from factual abuse that the teacher is doing to students? And what is the way that if one person comes and talks about it, is that enough to make a change? How do you observe behavior? How do you verify whether it's true? Because in most of these cases, it is hard to come up with proof that is considered proof in a lot of like judicial systems in a way, right? Like a voice recording or a video recording or a picture, those are considered better forms of proof than like a personal story in a way. So how do you distinguish it between abuse versus the teachers being a mean teacher? Like that's like part of emotional abuse, but there's a difference between like the teacher is not flexible to my learning needs versus there's a slight difference between being a bad teacher or being an abusive teacher, right? So how do you find that difference of what's happening to the kid, what's happening to the student? How do you verify these stories? How do you keep it anonymous, right? Because one of the biggest things is if an investigation is ongoing while the teacher and student are still in the same school premise, then the student, if they're the victim, is not going to feel safe, or the teacher, if they're the victim, will not feel safe because school abuse can happen to teachers as well, where they're the victims of abuse from kids, depending on the age of the students and what kind of situation is happening. So yeah, that's a big legal thing to figure out. Like, how do you protect both people, or like as long as an investigation is ongoing, or how do you verify where something's true or not? Yeah.
That's a great point. One question I would like to ask both of you is, let's say you are parents now, and you have to send your child to school, and then you learn that in one school uh, they're excellent at teaching the subject. They would learn, and there even like research is that are being published from teachers of that school. Everything is really good, but there are also some allegations that and they're just allegations, nothing has been confirmed as truths, but there are some allegations that say few teachers have been have been abusive. And then there's another school has a really good image, as in you do know that you've learned stories from other people that, people who go there, the teachers are really good. They make sure, all these trainings are done. They're very transparent about like what training each student, each teacher has gone through. And of course, all hypothetical. I don't really know whether all this is feasible or not. But like, so you know for sure that they will be good people, but you don't know if it's a hit or miss with whether the students will actually learn everything. Because of course, they're in the same system, so they would have to like learn the same material, but whether, so they probably the same books as well and all that is the same. But with the teachers, you don't know whether the teachers will be good enough to teach the subject. And of course, in here I am making the assumptions that if you're good at research, if you're good enough to research and publish something, then you're also good enough to teach, which is not the case. But I am making this assumption because we have to make some assumptions to ask a good question. So yes, which school would you pick?
Tough one. Dakshinamoorthy, I'd like you to go first.
I was expecting this. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll go first. Then. It is a tough one, but um, I mean, it's a tough one if I look at the preface of it. But at the end of the day, I think it's an easy decision for me. I'll go with the second school because I personally feel that learning anything is 70% on the student. So I think being a good person and teaching the student how to teaching the student good values and good ideas is much more important than teaching him or her good physics or good math, because he or she definitely can learn good physics or good math on their own, but learning values on their own is very hard because that is something you learn based on your experience, right? You'll have to interact with another person to gain all those things. So I'd say the second school.
Very interesting. Ilakkiya?
After that answer, probably would go with the second one too. Not that I was thinking about the first one, but my reasoning is that if the school is transparent about all the trainings and certifications that their teachers go through before qualifying to be a teacher at that school, I would assume as well that the teachers have also received some amount of training in being a teacher, because to go through so many certifications and pass so many requirements, they need to be dedicated to their field in a way that I think a good teacher, in a way that would make them a good teacher, I think. So I would probably pick the second school. And I know that when I was younger, my parents did a lot at home as well with like different worksheets and workbooks and activities to help me learn alongside what I was learning in school. So I'm thinking that hopefully I'll be able to do that for my kids as well, to keep up with what they're learning and see where they're at in a way that I can recognize if things aren't going so hot. And I guess this is like a tangent after what you just mentioned. I was recently talking to a bunch of my employers, I guess, and they were talking about how in the United States there is some requirement for schools to be transparent about um, any like crime statistics that happen on their campus. And that includes things like sexual assault, sexual abuse, robbery, theft, like those kinds of things. They have to be transparent about it, particularly like on the sexual abuse and harassment side of things. And for failing to comply with that transparency, they can be fined excessively. And like recently, I think Penn State got like a $2.6 million fine for not complying to that. And if there's kind of requirements like that to be transparent about what's happening and report accurate numbers, and that kind of information is public knowledge that helps students and parents make decisions about where they want to go to school or universities afterwards, that can also play a large role in making sure schools are staying accountable and of their faculty that they have and any incidents that are happening, how they handle it correctly, things like that.
That is very interesting because transparency would definitely help. It would also like sort of tell us if maybe like it's not that sexual harassment or those things is an exception to those schools that happen. It is just that it's something that we have to like because right now, the way at least I see it, with emotional abuse, I think that's like a pervasive thing where it happens in every school. But then like with physical abuse and sexual abuse, I don't think it happens in every school, and that could be a very privileged, ignorant opinion. And so like by having these things very transparent, it would definitely help. Um, One other thing I would say is with by let's say like you do know these things, right? So you get to know these things. If you for example, like I love. I'm going to go on a tangent. I love arguing like sports related stuff because if somebody says something bad about my team, I can say something bad about his team or her team. Whereas the thing with schools or to some people even religion, like they can't really say hey, that's wrong in your thing too, right? And whereas like no, like there's a problem, it's if it's affecting, okay, this is affecting us, we need to change something, we need to do something. And like that's something that I think that some people individually have that mindset, but I don't think that's like the overall mindset that we have. And plus I'm not even taking into account that some people who go to school who are like this is like the common thing, the common identities that you have, and then anyone who joins from like who doesn't have that identity, uh, they are different. And when they are different, it would definitely be it could definitely be tough for them, because not just that like maybe the things about them that needs to be celebrated are not being celebrated, but also people might look at them as like as a different thing. And so how teachers have their favorites. There could also be something about people having their not so favorite people in a class. And if that is the case, is that maybe sometimes maybe it can be shown in like physical abuse also, but what if it gets shown in other places where that we don't talk about?
Yeah, so it's like, it's bad everywhere in all the schools. So I guess it's okay. So I think, yep, that sort of mentality always, brings down the quality of yourself, because why do you want to compare yourself to something bad and say, hey, it's okay, I'm just like that? I mean, it's bad. So if you're just like that, you're bad too. So there needs to be a change on that. Yep, definitely agree on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to say one more thing where how they where it happens or not. There's like the thing where the comparison to this person or that person, and for the lack of a better name, I'm taking Sharma because that's the one he usually uses in memes. So Sharma's son took 90 marks in maths, whereas you have taken 88. So why didn't you take? But I took more in physics. Don't compare that. Compare this, and they do it in a student level. But why don't they do it in a level like for the schools itself, where like if the school is bad in these things. And I also know that like you can actually rate your professors and teachers in my college, and I don't think I that was there that was prevalent in my school, and it could be there now. But that's also one of the ways where if that happens, that would be pretty cool. So people would get to know their honest opinion, where like people are rated for how well they do. With there'll be a lot of homeworks. So it's not like they're rated as a good person or a bad person. They're like how many homeworks are there? Would you have to like do a lot of learning, and even small things like this person is not going to give you a lot of marks. So if you can avoid him, like avoid him, and all those things. And that also means, can you choose your teacher? Because I did have times where I had the option, but for the most part in my school times, the teachers sort of like chose the class, and then I got those teachers. I couldn't reselect the teachers that I wanted. So even if I knew a teacher doesn't like me, even before everything started, it's not like I can choose to go to another class because I want to stay with my friends. At the same time, then I'm stuck with my teacher. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. in my college, we did have a system where we had to rate all the teachers based on a variety of factors, like you said, about what we feel about their knowledge, what we feel about their homeworks, their difficulty, and all that. I think that is not present in schools, and it would be good. But I think that should be only for, I'd say, uh, the class 10 and above, maybe, because below that, I'm not sure, if students will have the mindset or will have the maturity to objectively think about those questions and give proper ratings. And I know people in my college, because they had a fight, or what is it, tussle with the professor. They just give them low ratings in spite of them being pretty knowledgeable or teaching well.
Yeah, I know that rating professors can be a useful way to keep professors somewhat accountable, right? Because it is generally their supervisors who end up seeing the results of what do students think. And if changes were made according to it, it would kind of put teachers on the spot in a way. Like if of the 300 students in this class, 260 of them want to be in this professor's version or this teacher's versions rather than the 40 with yours, that means this teacher B is doing something wrong. What if that relates to like pay related changes? But again, like Dakshinamoorthy mentioned, there is like some consideration that needs to be taken for just childish responses or planned sabotage of a certain teacher or uh, other bias related answers. Because I was talking to someone who's interested in applying to be a professor, and she was talking about how in those kind of teacher professor reviews, there's unfair bias against women teachers, like things that are considered okay or acceptable or great behavior in male professors is rated as negative behavior when females do it. And there's so much more emphasis on, how do you dress, how do you look, because students try to make comments on that in ratings. And it can bring down a teacher's ability to teach and reputation if too much consideration is given to those kind of biased comments that come out of students. So definitely some balance needs to be struck there between taking student input is definitely valuable. Just choosing how to apply it correctly is where I would say nuance is needed. But including reviews like that, 100% a good move.
I would like to ask one last question before we go into closing thoughts, which is what are you guys' thoughts on moral policing done by teachers?
Like saying these behaviors are wrong, or could you elaborate more with an example, perhaps?
Darshan, do you have like a point? So that can probably.
Yeah, I think it's very much based on an Indian context, because moral policing happens a lot here. I don't really have a yes or no answer, because there are a lot of considerations. I mean, for Ilakkiya, you were asking for an example, right? So an example of moral policing in Indian colleges would be, say, a guy and a girl in college. They are sitting in a chair outside the college building, and let's say they are talking, or let's just say they are in a relationship, right? So the moral policing here would be a professor coming to them and saying, "Hey, this is wrong. You should not do this.
Oh,
If you continue, I'll like complain," or something like that. Some people just stop with the comment. Some people, tend to go a bit further and report them to the higher officials. So that is an example of moral policing.
okay.
And he has used a very, like an example, like sort of like the, like with relationships and things. They even use it for like small things where I it was in my kindergarten where, like I was kind of unruly where, I saw, I didn't really stick with the group. I kind of like went here and there. And, so moral policing is not a bad term. It's just, it can be good or bad. So, so when that was done, they basically said, hey, if you do it, I'll tell your mother. And I actually thank my mother for this like every time, which is I actually said, okay, I was going to tell my mother the story, all these stories anyway, and so you can do it as well. And like I didn't know then, but then like now I got like later when I learned that my mom gave me a lot of freedom for me to do the mistakes that I have to do to learn a lot of these things, and I thank her for that like a lot. And so more. while those are good things, moral policing is something that can be good or bad, and it also comes in a, it's sort of like a cultural aspect as well. With sometimes some things that I don't understand about you, I would say, hey, you shouldn't do it. But then like you might have very much a reasonable, sane, rational reason to do it, but I just won't be like I won't be listening to your reasons, and I would just say no. So that's why I wanted to ask like moral policing. What are you guys' thoughts?
So thanks for the examples. I understand it a bit more now. And I would say it depends on what morals they're trying to police, right? Like in the example that Dakshinamoorthy mentioned, that's policing on relationships and guys talking to girls or girls talking to guys, because there's such a taboo about relationships and love and just any interaction between guys and girls in Indian context, because they see it as such a distraction, a sin, a terrible thing to do. They only want you to associate with the people of your gender. They think it's a crime to talk with someone of the other gender. And because of that, things like sexual abuse, sexual harassment, relationship abuse, domestic abuse, all those things, because they're associated with taboo topics, are so covered up, right? So that kind of moral policing, I would say, is wrong, because they're making relationships taboo, and then things related to it also become taboo, and then issues get covered up. Even things like school abuse get covered up because of it. So that's a wrong thing to do moral policing. But something like hazing, that's like physically hurting students on campus, I would say that's a good place for professors to intervene and say, this is inappropriate, this is wrong, stop, let the person go, like maybe even make a report of other people who are doing the thing, right? So recognizing what behaviors can contribute to even more taboo, it would be useful, because moral policing the wrong things creates like covert, hidden, bad, abusive situations, because you don't talk about it freely. You don't talk about relationships freely. So when someone has a relationship and there's problems in their relationship, who do they talk to? Their parents consider it taboo. Their friends consider it taboo. Their teachers consider it taboo. Who do they talk to if they're being abused in a relationship? So that kind of cover up and that kind of taboo is kind of what we're trying to get around and stop by talking about these topics openly here. So yeah, it depends on what it's about.
I will also go with a similar answer and say it depends. But one thing that Akshay pointed out that I wanted to point it out is probably the biggest factor in moral policing is the culture difference between, say, the professors and students or teachers and students. Because of course there's going to be a culture difference and the way an outlook difference, right? The way they look at things. Of course, a 50-year-old professor is going to have much different views. So I think that professors should also understand that the students or professors or teachers should understand that the students could have different views. But it is also important for the students to understand that, hey, the professor is obviously going to have a different view on this, right? So they should also, I'd say, both sides have to strike a balance on this, right? So what is considered wrong and on both their ideologies. So that can obviously come under moral policing, right? So another student, like you gave a good example of somebody beating somebody up. So that is considered wrong everywhere, right? Even among old people and even among young people. But the things which have a 0 and 1 from either sides, I think it's difficult because if you argue, you can argue for your side, but the other side is already going to argue for their side, right? So I think that is also a very difficult thing to figure out, but it would be much easier if both sides understood each other, not just the professors, but also the students, to understand how they would react. So it's very simple to avoid conflicts. So in from a student's point of view, I'd say, hey, if the professor is going to take this in the wrong way, let me just avoid doing this right now. And the professors can go, okay, maybe it's wrong for me, maybe it's right for them. So maybe I can give a little more freedom for them and only, go and reprimand them if they cross a limit, right? So I think it's better for each side to understand the other side more on this topic.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And it's an important element of being a professor or teacher, right? As you get older and you become an authority figure in situations where there's people younger than you, like you cannot. It is such a changing environment. School, like every generation's a um, different outlook on things, like you mentioned, and so one of the important parts of being a professor is being flexible and adaptable to changing times and changing environment of your students rather than being very rigid, or in students also not being super rigid about what they like. I would just say if professors stop spending their time reporting kids who are in a relationship sitting on a bench together and spent more time talking about actual problems in the school with like management or resources given to students or safety measures, or is there a way to report actual abuse in the school, and like just there's so many other problems they could spend their energy on rather than moral policing really tiny things that aren't actually issues.
Totally agree. So with that, we'll go to closing thoughts. And I shall mine first, which is to the viewers who are seeing this. If any of these things didn't happen in your school, awesome, because we're just speaking in terms of schools in general. We didn't take any school names here because that was very important to us. We didn't want a school's reputation to go down because of this discussion. And you know with these things, even if it didn't happen to you, and even if it doesn't even seem like it could happen to you, because it's being said, that means it is happening around. And what's important now is what to do next. So of course, if you do want to like bash us, it's completely fine, go for it. But still, probably like do it with this in mind, and think about it, whether like if you want to bash us, like think about why you want to do it. The other thing is the question I asked earlier with the two schools, one being good people, whereas like one being good teachers, which one would you pick? And so where like the other side is uncertain, but then like what you do know is this, and you guys both picked the good people school, and that tells a lot about like what at least a parent wants to do. Maybe as a student, you guys have might have different opinions because it's your life, but then when you think by being a parent, you guys have hopefully start looking at it as a hypothetical thing, as like what is right, what is wrong. And at that time, both of you picked good people, and I think that needs to be shown in terms of whatever training is given to teachers, as well as when they pick things, like is this being taken into account, and hopefully it is. And that is my closing thoughts. Those are my closing thoughts.
Okay, so yeah, reiterating on Akshay's point, I'd like to close saying that these are just our opinions, our thoughts, So if any of this by chance hurt any of you, please take that into consideration. And closing on the whole school abuse part, I reiterate saying that it's a very, very big gray area and it actually requires a lot of thought. It just doesn't boil down to people complaining and taking action. There needs to be a system in place, and that system is not going to be easy to figure out, but they'll have to do it eventually. All schools have to do it eventually.
I'll close by saying, be a, if this has happened to you, really sorry that it has happened, and I hope that you're able to find ways to either talk to people who are close to you, or you know, even if you don't want to find or like fight for a solution or change something where in the school that it happened, at least you can go maybe talk to a therapist about the issues, because getting abused at a younger age can have a lot of different downstream effects, like drug abuse, changes in personality, fear in being in spaces, anxiety, PTSD. There's a lot of different downstream effects that abuse can have. And if you feel like anything that you're experiencing is due to that, please like talk to someone to try and resolve it and cope with it well. And if you are a parent or a friend or anyone, like, make sure, I mean, specifically parents, if you can look up what abuse, bullying, harassment, sexual harassment all mean and look like, you can talk to your kids about what they look like as well, and therefore, make sure they're aware in situations, and as a parent, help them out in case they share it with you, because by talking about it, you make it easier for your kids to share with you as well. And yeah, if it's happening and someone's talking about it, it is happening. Like, don't look for the definitive proof in a way. It's more likely that it's a true statement than a fake one. And yeah.
Thank you so much for everyone, both of you as well as everyone who's watching here. And I want to say to any teachers or any just like school faculty who's seeing this, you can, if you can confirm, like there are certain reforms that can be good. You don't have to say why it's good, or like, you have some reforms that you think would make changes to our system. You can comment it down down in the comment section, and we would read it, and we'll try to respond to it as well. And to other students, we've all been students, uh, so if you know something, if you've seen something, and if you can't maybe like like share it somewhere else, you can share it with us, and that can be through email or that can be through comment section. Go for it. Hopefully like this conversation is adds as a spark to a lot more conversations. And this in this conversation, none of us had any questions. We just started talking. We didn't even know what we are going to talk about, and then we spoke for 1 hour now. So if we can do it, you can probably do it with your friends too. And maybe like try having these discussions, and see what comes up. And with that, I want to thank everyone here again, and hopefully you have a great day.
Thanks for watching. For more discussions, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Also, make sure to like and comment more topics that you'd like to see us discuss. We'll see you next time.